We were convinced at the time, I was convinced at the time, it was the right thing to do. It was the necessary thing to do. So we are aware of the court decision. We have discussed it with the Prime Minister.
Hey guys, Marcel Irnie Racing. We have breaking news within the minute. The court rules the Liberals' use of the Emergencies Act was unjustified, unreasonable, guys. Brand new information right from the court ruling. As you can see, the National Post just posted this 3 minutes ago. So, from Ottawa, the Liberal government's decision to invoke the Emergencies Act in response to the 2022 Freedom Convoy protests was unreasonable, unjustified, and violated the Charter, the federal court has ruled. In a lengthy ruling published today, Federal Court Justice Richard Mosley found that though the Freedom Convoy protests in early 2022 were causing harm to Canada's economy, trade, and commerce, they did not rise to the level of a threat to national security as defined by the law. He thus sided with the civil liberties group who argued the Liberal government went beyond its power and was not justified in its historic invocation of the Emergency Act in February 2020.
We have discussed it with the Prime Minister, with Cabinet colleagues, with senior federal government officials and experts. We respect very much Canada's independent judiciary.
Oh, it's getting sunny out here in the desert. I have concluded that the decision to issue their proclamation of the Emergencies Act does not bear the hallmarks of reasonableness, justification, transparency, and intelligibility, and was not justified in relation to the relevant factual and legal constraints that were required to be taken into consideration, Mosley wrote. On the same day, Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland said the government did not agree with Mosley's decision and promised to appeal it. Yeah, which Freeland, of course. They'll extend this beyond all reasonable measures to try to cover up what they've done until they achieve their goals. The public safety of Canadians was under threat. Our national security, which includes our national economic securities, was under threat. Freeland said, I was convinced at the time it was the right thing to do. It was the necessary thing to do. End of Freeland's quote. Mosley's ruling stems from the 4 legal challenges to civil liberty groups, including the Canadian Civil Liberties Association and the Canadian Constitutional Foundation.
However, we do not agree with this decision, and respectfully, we will be appealing it.
The groups argued the Liberals exceeded their powers when they invoked the unprecedented powers of the Act on February 14, 2022, in response to ongoing Freedom Convoy blockades in Ontario and Alberta. At the time, the Act was largely used to freeze some convoy participants' bank accounts, compel tow truck companies to cooperate with local police, clearing out blockades, and mark parts of downtown Ottawa as a no-go zone. I'm going to add to that, at exactly the night the Emergencies Act was voted on in Parliament, so 1 week later after it was enacted, the Parliament voted on whether to keep it or not, and which was February 21st, and at 9 p.m. that night, my channel was shadow banned by like 99%, demoted by 99%, which was proven in the Twitter files, Facebook files, that this is really going on, and that there was the government, FBI, contacting these companies like Google and Facebook and Twitter and telling them, hey, we need you to shut this account down. We need you to demote this account. So they demoted Tucker Carlson's account by 50%. And so mine went from 1 to 2 million views per day, 100,000 views per hour to nothing, like literally 100, 200 to 1,000 views per hour or per day. And then the channel was dead. So it's exactly 9 p.m. Like, millions and millions and millions and millions of views, and then it's not like my news stopped. It's not like the news changed, that people weren't looking for it. Everything was just continuing to build even, and just boom, done. So we know they went after the social media as well. And then after that, of course, they started to censor the internet officially in the public with their bills of bullshit. Continuing with the story, the Emergencies Act relies on a definition of a threat to the security of Canada embedded in the legislation that governs CSIS, which is their Central Intelligence Service for Canada. When justifying its invocation of the Act, the Liberals argued they had reasonable grounds to believe the protests posed a threat to national security and could not be dealt with in any other way. And if anyone watched the commission, the Liberal hired commission to look into the invocation of the Act, the CSIS and the police forces all said they did not need any help. In fact, they were able to dismantle the border blockade in Windsor without any emergency. All the things were done before the Emergencies Act. So there was no reasonable or asking from the police or the CSIS. In fact, the CSIS said otherwise, that there was no credible threat. So Judge Mosley disagreed that it was reasonable. Quote, "The record does not support a conclusion that the convoy had created a critical, urgent, and temporary situation that was national in scope and could not effectively be dealt with under any other law of Canada," he wrote. The harm being caused to Canada's economy, trade, and commerce was very real and concerning, but it did not constitute threats or the use of serious violence to persons or property, he added. Displaying an uncommon level of introspection in a ruling, Mosley admitted that at the outset of the hearing, his view was leaning towards the belief that the government's invocation of the Act was reasonable. Mosley, the judge, he said he considered the events of the convoy to have gone, quote, "beyond legitimate protests," end quote, and were, quote, "unacceptable breakdown of public order," end quote. He also admitted that he had been at the government's table at the time of the decision. He may have agreed it was necessary to invoke the Act. Quote, "I acknowledge that in conducting judicial review of that decision, I am revisiting that time with the benefit of hindsight and a more extensive record of the facts and law than that were which before the government," he wrote. But months of time to, quote, "carefully deliberate," end quote, on the evidence and arguments, as well as the arguments by the CCF and the CCLA, changed his mind. Quote, "Their participation in these proceedings has demonstrated again the value of public interest litigants, especially in presenting informed legal arguments. This case may not have turned out the way it has without their involvement." Mosley's conclusion contrasts starkly with the Commissioner Paul Rouleau, who headed the public inquiry into the government's use of the Emergency Act last year. In his report, Rouleau concluded the Liberals were justified in using the Act, but appeared to leave the door open to a different conclusion by the federal court and every citizen of Canada and the world, of course. "I have concluded the Cabinet was reasonably concerned that the situation it was facing was worsening at a risk of becoming dangerous and unmanageable," he said, but noted the evidence was not overwhelming and reasonable and informed people could reach a different conclusion. That's a quote from Rouleau, the Liberal old man Rouleau, who has pretty much ruined his reputation with getting paid for, bought by Trudeau. Let's continue on. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre also reacted to the news on Twitter X by placing the blame solely on Trudeau. He caused the crisis by dividing people. Then he violated charter rights to illegally suppress citizens. "As PM, I will unite our country for freedom," he wrote on X. Now, I'm going to show you guys Michelle Rempel-Gardner. She did a post about this right now on, it's pretty much live here, the federal court rules, Trudeau.
Major decision that many Canadians will welcome, but just some information for you on what has gone down. So, breaking news, and this is actually from the CBC, says the federal government's decision to invoke the Emergencies Act against convoy protests was unreasonable, the court rules. So this is a massive ruling. The ruling itself is well over 100 pages, and it's just breaking. But some of the key highlights are as follows. So Federal Court Justice Richard Mosley wrote as follows in the decision: "I conclude that there was no national emergency justifying the invocation of the Emergencies Act, and the decision to do so was therefore unreasonable and ultra vires." And of course, course, ultra vires is a Latin term used by courts to refer to actions beyond the scope of the law. So the question many of you are going to be asking is, well, what happens next? So moments ago, in a scrum from the Liberal cabinet retreat in Montreal, the Liberal cabinet, including Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, said that the federal government will be appealing this decision.
I would just like to take a moment to remind Canadians of how serious the situation was in our country when we took that decision.
Well, anyways, guys, I've got to get ready for dirt biking, fix a flat tire out here in the desert near Imperial Sand Dunes. So yeah, the Emergencies Act back in the forefront, guys. Unreasonable, unjustified. This is Marcel Irnie on Irnieracing YouTube channel. Make sure to like the video to help with the bullshit algorithm and share it with your friends and watch to the end if you, obviously you're watching me right now if you did. Cheers.
The public safety of Canadians was under threat. Our national security, which includes our national economic security, was under threat. It was a hard decision to take. We took it very seriously